Hello, everyone, and welcome to a deeper look into crime. Today, we're exploring a profoundly disturbing and highly secretive environment, the interrogation room. It is a dark, high-stakes space where human psychology is pushed to its absolute limits, and where the line between justice and survival often blurs. So, how exactly do you extract the truth? I mean, we all keep secrets, right? But how do you get the truth out of someone who is highly trained and highly motivated to hide it from you? In this explainer, we're going to take you right into the heart of that pursuit, examining not just the hidden truths we seek, but the fiercely debated and sometimes deeply controversial methods used to uncover them. Because make no mistake, the interrogation room, it's the ultimate psychological battleground. It is this confined space of immense, highly calculated pressure. And here in the United States, we have two powerful intelligence entities that step into this exact battleground, but they take drastically different paths. On one side, we have law enforcement. On the other, covert intelligence. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how the truth is really extracted, we first have to uncover the rules of the game. We're looking at two agencies operating under two entirely different rulebooks. Of course, I'm talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Central Intelligence Agency. The most obvious contrast right off the bat is their legal boundaries. The FBI's jurisdiction is strictly domestic. They are absolutely bound by the U.S. Constitution. That means every single interrogation is governed by Miranda rights, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, all those protections against self-incrimination and guaranteeing the right to counsel. Now, the CIA, on the other hand, they're focused on foreign intelligence operations. They're guided by the National Security Act and some very highly classified executive directives. And those differing boundaries, they bleed directly into what these agencies are actually trying to achieve. The FBI's primary goal is to gather evidence that is going to be admissible in court. They have to operate under the strict, transparent oversight of the Department of Justice and the judiciary. But the CIA's objective is fundamentally different. They need actionable intelligence to prevent immediate, real-world threats. Because of that urgency, they operate with very limited transparency, overseen mostly by the executive branch and closed-door intelligence committees. So what does this all mean for their actual tactics? Let's look at the FBI first. Their methodology is probably best described as a highly calculated, legally admissible game of psychological chess. They aren't just looking for a quick, forced answer. No, they're looking for a reliable narrative, something that will absolutely hold up under the intense scrutiny of a courtroom. To play that game, the FBI relies on a non-coercive behavioral science approach. They use rapport building to establish trust, making the subject feel a sense of psychological comfort. They utilize cognitive interviewing to enhance memory recall without using leading questions. They'll strategically disclose evidence, piece by piece, just to catch contradictions. And all the while, they are constantly running behavioral analysis on verbal and nonverbal cues. It's methodical, and the science shows that cooperative subjects simply give us much more accurate information. The absolute key here is reliability. Now, historically, U.S. law enforcement leaned pretty heavily on what's called the Reid technique. It was a very aggressive, accusatory model of interrogation. But as criminology and behavioral science advanced, the FBI actually shifted away from it. Why? Well, because high-pressure accusations dramatically increase the risk of false confessions. So to keep that reliability high and ensure everything is court admissible, they've moved strictly toward ethical interviewing. But what happens when those legal frameworks just vanish? What happens when the goal isn't a courtroom conviction at all, but stopping an imminent, catastrophic threat? Well, this brings us to the CIA's post-9/11 methodologies. It's a descent into what many consider the truly dark measures of intelligence gathering. The CIA utilized what they called enhanced interrogation techniques, or EITs. These were heavily coercive physical and psychological pressure methods. At the time, the CIA's rationale was clinical, and it was urgent. They truly believed these extreme measures were absolutely necessary to extract life-saving intelligence from high-value terrorist targets who were specifically trained to resist standard questioning. These methods operated in a really profound legal gray area. We're talking about things like waterboarding, severe sleep deprivation, stress positions, sensory deprivation, prolonged isolation, and intense psychological fear manipulation. And while the agency argued for their necessity under the umbrella of national security, human rights organizations and legal scholars around the world have widely and severely criticized these practices as outright torture. But look, if we step beyond the intense debates regarding legality for a second, we have to look closely at the behavioral science here. Coercion of this magnitude comes at a severe, truly devastating psychological cost to the human mind. There is just a stark contrast in the psychological damage left behind. The FBI's approach, focusing on communication and cognitive engagement, generally results in minimal long-term psychological harm. The CIA's coercive approach, however, resulted in severe trauma. Subjects experienced long-term PTSD, crippling anxiety, and, this is critical from an investigative standpoint, profound memory distortion. And that memory distortion, that is the fatal flaw in coercive methodology. I mean, we all know how just a little bit of everyday stress can blur our memories, right? Now, imagine that stress multiplied infinitely. A core criminological finding is that extreme stress actually reduces a subject's cognitive accuracy. When a human being is subjected to unbearable physical and psychological pressure, compliance-based false statements just skyrocket. Subjects will often provide entirely fabricated or misleading information, simply to make the suffering stop. And this wasn't just some theory. It became a heavily documented reality. The impartial conclusion from the 2014 Senate Intelligence Committee report was quite damning. They found that enhanced interrogation techniques were just not more effective than traditional methods. The intelligence they obtained was often completely unreliable, and ultimately, the use of these techniques severely damaged the global reputation of the United States. Which brings us right back to the science of truth. When we take a step back from the urgency of a ticking clock and we actually look at the hard data, the behavioral science, and the consensus of modern intelligence, a very clear verdict emerges regarding what is actually effective. When we compare the final data, the CIA's methods prioritized rapid extraction under extreme conditions, but they yielded low reliability, massive complications, and highly questionable long-term intelligence value. The FBI, on the other hand, operates a much slower process, but it yields high accuracy, legally admissible evidence, and it maintains long-term sustainability. From a purely scientific standpoint, lawful, rapport-based interrogation is definitively more reliable. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to reflect on. If the true goal of intelligence and law enforcement is to protect society, which method actually achieves that without sacrificing the very values that society is built upon? True security, as the data clearly suggests, relies on psychologically informed, lawful methods. Comment your thoughts on this explainer. Also, subscribe to us to see more explainers like this in the future. See you in the next explainer.